How's it going, everybody? And welcome to the Barely There podcast. I'm your host, Duke Coughlin, joined as always with Lucas Perfetti. You could follow me on Twitter at @ThatPodGuyDuke. You could also follow Lucas over at LucasFetti46. Be sure to follow the pod at Barely There Pod on Twitter. YouTube, we're live up there and right now. If you want to join the chat, be sure to do that. We always love kind of talking with the fans, especially during the off season where we have more than enough topics to really kind of go around. You can bounce whatever you want off of us. Be sure to subscribe on Spotify, Apple, all that stuff. And now that I've gotten that out of the way, Lucas Perfetti, what's going on, buddy? We are getting a little bit closer to that league year beginning. I believe the official date is March 17th, if I know off the top of my head. I could be wrong on that, but that is kind of where we're getting to. I know the official tampering window is starting to open up, and we are already starting to see some cuts. We know there's definitely some cost-saving moves that Chicago Bears can make. Some of them can wait until later into the summer to where that won't affect our cap nearly as much. But Al-Quadin Muhammad was the first one to kind of hit the cutting board for the Chicago Bears. A guy that I think we were kind of a fan of when he was signed. It's just unfortunate how it all worked out. And it's kind of proof that following your defense coordinator isn't always a recipe to success. You know, he's a guy that definitely overplayed his hype a little bit in Indianapolis. But anyway, wish him nothing but the best. I think that's the first of many cap cutting moves to happen. But Lucas, how are we feeling about what we have going moving forward so far? How are we feeling about the Al-Quadin Muhammad move, and how are we feeling about the offseason moving forward?
Yeah, so 17th was a decent guess. It's usually around that time. I'm doing well, but want to give you a couple important dates now that the dates are up and I have it in front of me. March 15th is the start of new league year, 4 p.m. 4 p.m. What is that? Eastern time, of course. The 13th and the 15th is the legal tampering period, which it's become more of the start of the new league year. If we're going to be honest, right? Like we hear about signings, at least agreements that may be dependent on a physical or whatever it may be. And then March 7th is also an important day to mark on your calendar because that's when franchise tags are closed at 4 p.m. So if you don't franchise tag someone by 4 p.m., then all those guys we're kind of looking at and kind of maybe putting in our mock off seasons, the Deron Paynes of the world. We don't know what this team's going to do. They're pressed against the salary cap. We'll know for sure on March 7th. So that's a good date and a definitive date to really start seeing like, hey, who's hitting the open market? And yeah, man, then we're pretty much into draft season after that. You think like really with free agency, it's only the first 2-3 days that are eventful, maybe the first 2, right? And then it's like really slows down fast. It's whoever kind of spends that big cash in those first couple days, they chill out for a while. And then you start to see like the price tags falling and all that. So, it's exciting times upon us finally. And like we kind of covered on the last episode, the Bears are the belle of the ball. We are seeing a ton of Justin Fields takes. People are coming around again to Louis Riddick because he said like, why on earth would you trade him? Makes no sense. But then again, like it's rumor season, it's talking season. So people are getting frustrated with it, but that's what comes with the number 1 overall pick and the ability to have your choice at quarterback, right? It's gonna allow for that type of discourse. So if you were hoping for a tank and thinking that this wasn't going to be the discourse that happened, sorry, brother, you get what you wish for.
Yeah, no, I think the narrative always is from the outside looking in. And we've seen this with multiple Chicago sports teams. Dylan with just the wonderful take. Oh, I'm sorry, that's not Dylan, that's burner account. Sorry, buddy. So I really think the thing you always see from the outside media is, are they going to stay at the pick? I feel like that's always kind of the selling point. It's never a foregone conclusion, even if it's completely obvious they're going to trade the pick. So they always got to start the like whole rumor mill and everything like that. I thought Justin, when he was on Pardon My Take, answered all those questions pretty professionally because we know, Big Cat and PFT commentator, they're guys who aren't going to really hold back on questions like that. And I thought Justin handled himself really well. Good listening. Guys haven't already. What's that?
Did you see the Rich Eisen one as well? Rich Eisen like interviewed him at the Super Bowl. Kind of similar though. He was like, "Hey, are you ready for all this to happen?"
Well, yeah, no, I don't know if I caught that one in particular. I know Justin was discussing a lot of stuff at the Super Bowl, and I do think it's kind of cool that we have a Bears quarterback that's not kind of hiding away during the off season. It's kind of nice to see him kind of and I'm not taking shots on any former quarterbacks or anything like that, but it seems like Justin's pretty confident with who he is as the Chicago Bears quarterback. Was not shying away from any questions from that PFT, or pardon my take, interview in itself. I think he did it. I think it was painfully obvious that it wasn't like one of these like, oh, you can't ask this or you can't ask that type of thing. So it seems like Justin's pretty understanding about the entire situation that's kind of put in front of him. And I think he understands the storylines that come with the Bears having the number 1 overall pick and having guys like, Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, Will Levis, in some people's opinions, kind of sitting near the top. So I thought he handled himself incredibly well, and it was really nice to see from a Bears quarterback. And I think that bodes very well for playing in a market like Chicago, where I feel like we've beaten this point to death, but I think sometimes people forget how bad the Chicago media can be on players at times. And I think Justin has handled himself incredibly professionally for everything that's kind of come out throughout the offseason. But I guess to answer your original question, it's all talk. It's all stuff to get people talking. If league circles had any idea who was actually going to have the number 1 overall pick, trust me, they would be discussing that. Like if the Colts had the number 1 overall pick, we wouldn't hear another, are the Bears going to keep Justin fucking Fields?
Yeah, no doubt.
Immediately be like, what are the Colts going to do to the pick? Is it going to be Stroud or is it going to be Young? Do they swerve everybody and they draft a Will Anderson? Like, dude, it's all just dumb shit that kind of gets people to keep the channel on for another 5 minutes until they realize it's the same fucking shit they already heard on the radio or they already read on Twitter. So, like, I mean, props to the NFL Network crew and stuff like that and ESPN and all that shit for trying to get people to do the headlines. And that's how I take the Louis Riddick comment as well, because, I mean, honestly, dude, I'm just not a Louis Riddick guy, and I don't know if I ever will be, especially after the whole Matt Nagy slurping incident.
Well, yeah, but he brought up Matt Nagy in the situation, too. He's like, when are you guys just going to chill out?
I will never chill out on Matt Nagy. Like, so he can chill out on that. But it's all talk, man. It's the off season. It's the best time of the year. It's the worst time of the year. It's however you want to fucking see it. You know what I mean? It's for the people who don't follow other sports. They follow football. They need to keep people fucking glued to that TV to talk about football, and this is the best way to do it.
Yeah, I mean, NFL Live is still going an hour every single day. So, like, they're still in motion. They'll take some time. NFL Live's on ESPN, but they'll take some time, like, in between draft and OTAs and stuff like that to, hey, we'll do one show a week type thing. But right now, dude, it's been a daily occurrence. So they need something to talk about. Like you said, they need something to talk about. But
well, I mean, dude, when you think about it, and I'll let you keep going, but like, if you work in the media, especially in the NFL media, you go from fucking Radio Row to radio silence. Like, it's not something you can just kind of turn off. Like, you go from fucking going to Super Bowl week and seeing just the absolute madness that is and how much fucking incredible content you can get.
Mm-hmm.
And then it goes dead silent. You know what I mean? Like, you're still in that mode, dude. You still just drank 10 cups of coffee. You're not going to be able to just go to fucking bed. You know what I mean?
You got to wind down a little bit. That's a great little metaphor you came up with there. But I think, I also don't think Bears should be so resistant to the idea of maybe drafting a quarterback and trading Justin Fields. Not because I think it's going to happen or I agree with it that it should happen, but like, if you're a Bears fan, you should be wanting this front office to do its due diligence. Like, I get it. They've gotten rid of a lot of guys that were from the Pace era, stuff like that. I've even gone on record saying, like, hey, the timeline for the organization does not match up with Justin Fields' rookie contract, right? Like, they're clearly in a rebuild mode right now while Justin needs to be protected, needs to have playmakers around him, and that's not something that they gave him. So, where there's smoke, there's fire. But at the same time, like, you should want the Bears internally to be having this discourse to make sure that they make the right decision, right? Like, I'm not saying that I support the idea of trading Justin Fields, but you should be doing your due diligence. Now, coming out of college, I think Justin Fields was a better quarterback than all of these quarterbacks, to be honest, right? Like, but still, you want them doing their due diligence before they're willing to trade the pick.
Yeah, no, and that's honestly, like, I feel like that's any situation, because I feel like people are going to jump on the fact that it's like, oh, well, Lucas is saying we should look into trading Justin Fields. It's like, whenever you have the first overall pick, I don't
have to,
like, and like you look like, and maybe this isn't the best example, but this is actually a great example, but people aren't going to want to hear it. But it's pretty similar to like what the Cardinals did. They had just drafted Josh Rosen. And in the very next year, they're like, we're sitting at the number 1 overall fucking pick. And we have Kyler Murray, who is like a 2-sport superstar potentially to draft and be our franchise quarterback, which they've paid him to be their franchise quarterback, whether that's the right move or not. And, you know, say what you want about Kyler, I would probably die for that fucking production at a quarterback position in Chicago. You know what I mean? So like, I do think there is something to that. Absolutely. Now, do I think Justin Fields and Josh Rosen like
no,
match up at all? Rosen. Absolutely not. You know, but that doesn't mean you don't do your due diligence with the number 1 overall pick. You know, that's where I feel like Pace really made mistakes. Was he kind of came in early on? I don't want to talk about the past too much, but Pace talked about wanting to draft a quarterback every single season, and that just flat out didn't happen once he drafted Mitchell Trubisky. It was like he got his guy, he was honed in on his guy, and he never really thought to bring anything in around that besides fucking like Mark Sanchez and, you know, Mike Glennon and, you know what I mean? The trio of terrible quarterbacks that were brought in around Mitchell Trubisky.
We even touched on it last episode, right? Like Hendon Hooker right now should have been an early day 2, late day 1 pick. And he's getting projected in like the 4th round, 5th round. He's too good to be going there. Like if you have extra picks, especially if you trade down and he's still there sitting for you in the end of the 4th, beginning of the 5th, like you should pull the trigger on him. Look what the Packers did with Matt Flynn, and look at what Belichick did with Jimmy G and some of these guys. Like you develop a backup just in case.
And this is a trade we're going to talk about a little bit later in the show, but like, look at what Washington traded for RG3, and they still drafted Kirk Cousins.
And that was like, their franchise guy.
You need that type of backup plan because, like, as much as people want to deny that something like knock on fucking wood, something bad could happen to Justin Fields, like it can happen. We've seen it happen, and we saw how many fucking hits he took last year. Justin's a tough kid, but if Luke Getsy's going to continue to like play fucking suicide bomber with him, like this is where we're gonna fucking go. You know what I mean? You need to have a backup plan, and I that's why I would really like seeing us do our due diligence in the later rounds, for mid to late rounds, especially, you know, for sure at quarterback, because like if Justin were to go down, we need a guy who can come in and immediately run the exact same offense without much changing over. That's like, we can't have a fucking Trevor Siemian or a Trevor Siemian clone or
and people aren't
Nate Peterman.
Yeah, you know? People aren't understanding too. Like you at least want someone with similar qualities to Justin Fields, right? Especially if we're gonna run a more RPO style, speed option, you know, elements, shit like that. Like we should have a quarterback that can run those concepts when Justin Fields gets hurt, not when, if Justin Fields get hurt, right? You can't have your whole team so dependent on one player that if he goes down, you guys just completely derail. Like, I mean, take the Eagles. They're a perfect example. Nick Foles was their backup. Carson Wentz got hurt, was having an MVP season, looked like the franchise. And still, they won the Super Bowl, right? They were able to complete that mission without Carson Wentz. And then, lo and behold, here's another great example. Jalen Hurts taken at the top of the 2nd round. And the following year or 2 years after that, right? Like, and he is now their franchise quarterback, one of the best quarterbacks in the league. You have to have, what I'm saying is you have to have balls, right? And you have to be willing to move off of a guy if you don't think he is the guy, regardless of how the fans feel about it. With that being said, this is the most unanimously loved Chicago Bears quarterback. I know you'll see negative comments about him here and there, but like, I've never seen a majority of the fan base go into attack mode anytime someone says something negative about him. Like, he is so, like, you have to have the biggest pair of balls to move off of this guy and draft another quarterback, especially in this year before you surrounded him with talent, right? I think next year, if he were to not progress and you were to really install a great offensive line, another year with the system, right? Like, you have Claypool and Mooney who are decent. You add one more piece to that, like, kind of cooking with grease, right? Like, then you can reevaluate. But with you not giving him a chance last year to truly develop as a passer, I think it would be an insane mood that like Bears fans would need to see immediate results right now, or they would be at your fucking throat. Like, they would be writing hate mail to the McCaskies. Like, so I don't think it's a realistic option for them to trade Fields and draft another quarterback, but I'm just saying you want them to check all their boxes. You want them to make sure to do the due diligence and look at those top of the market quarterbacks, because how long have the Bears been around? Over 100 years. They've never been the number one overall pick. Like, this shit does not come around very often. You want them to handle this responsibly and with care.
I think we have had the number one overall pick before.
I don't think so, dude.
I think we have. I think we've had it a couple times actually. I'm pretty sure I saw a graphic about it. But anyway, not important. So like I guess what I said it last year, and I think it still holds true, and I think it's the way we're going to build this team moving into this year, is I think Justin Fields, I think they purposely didn't want to bring a lot around him last year because they wanted to see what he could do in non-ideal situations. And I think, whether he did it with his arm or he did it with his legs, I think he showed enough this past year to be like, okay, now let's see what he does with some toys. You know what I mean? Let's see what he does with a legit number one receiver that isn't named fucking Chase Claypool. Let's see what he can do when he's not being forced to throw to only Darnell Mooney the entire game. Let's see what he can do now that Cole Kmet's really starting to emerge as a legitimate threat at tight end and a guy who's also probably going to get an extension if we're looking a little bit down the road.
Play to meet.
Oh, dude, I'm going to be so excited to have that fucking, and I know you hate orange, but just that fucking beautiful orange Cole Kmet jersey.
Dude, I hope they just get rid of that jersey. I will correct myself, though. In 1941 and 1947, we need to get a little bit better at my Bears history. Those are the only times they had the number one overall pick. But in the Super Bowl era, they have not had the number one overall pick.
Okay. But I really... fuck Tom Harmon. I mean, well, no offense to Tom Harmon, but I mean, regardless, I really think this is going to be like a draft to either set, a draft that's going to set up for the future. I think we're gonna mess around and give Fields a little bit more, and I really think if you manipulate this first round pick well enough and you're able to get enough value going into next year and even the season after that, I think even if you were to spend on the offensive side of the football this year and you have an issue with Fields where you still don't buy that he's the guy next year, I think you have a lot of options where you can go at quarterback, whether it be in the draft or whether it be in fucking the trade market. So like we're in an interesting situation, and like you have to keep in mind that Ryan Poles didn't draft Justin Fields. But I think this is the year where you have to, like, even if you don't spend all the money, even if you don't spend all the cap, even if you don't spend a whole lot of money, like you have to start focusing on getting playmakers, on getting game breakers with Justin Fields on the offensive side of the football. Because now that you saw what he did, you saw what he had to do when plays broke down, when we basically had to run a fucking Dowell Loggins offense because we had no offensive weapons whatsoever. We saw that Justin could answer the bell. He didn't always answer the bell. He had rough patches, but it wasn't a great offense to be working with in the first place. So like now, if we see what he can do with talent on the offensive side of the football, we can finally see what Justin Fields is going to be in year 3. Because I feel like year 3 is always kind of that make or break season for a young quarterback.
I think he's explode, to be honest, as long as they protect him. I think they need, here's the thing. And it's good you bring that up, because I would say that if N'Keal Harry comes back and Chase Claypool is here, like, you have those guys that when you're in trouble, you can just throw the ball up to them, hoping for either a big catch or a pass interference, right? Like, you already have those guys. And as someone who is a Deebo Samuel, AJ Brown, give me a fucking guy who's 220, 6 foot flat advocate. Like, there are some separators in this draft that are built like a string bean, like some 175-pound guys, but like there are quite a few guys that I think aren't the highest level prospects, but should fall because of measurables, like being 5'11", 175, 180, whatever it is, right? Like, but they separate. They're more of your Stephon Diggs type players versus, your Quentin Johnson. Like, so we need a guy like that. And Mooney can get open, but he's not like leading the league in separation by any means, right? Like, we need a guy that he puts one foot in the ground and he puts someone in a blender and he's wide, dragging across the field, right? Like, the Bears don't have anyone like that. So that's important, right? I think there are some playmakers around him. Like you said, Kmet is coming around. Like, I'm not a huge Claypool guy. I was really big on him coming out of the draft. I've gotten a little soured due to some things that, he's done. And it's
easy
more,
to. it's easy to get sour on Chase
It's
Claypool.
partially personal, but at the same time, when you look at him as a player, and I got to see him for 5 games, I didn't necessarily see the effort I would like to see. I didn't get to see the playmaking that I wanted to see, and I get it; it's a limited sample size, whatever, right? But like the reality is, he's a guy that catches with his chest, not with his hands. And for a jump ball player, you want to be high pointing the ball and catching the ball with your hands. Like there were quite a few plays there last year where people were like, "Oh, it's a pass interference. Give him a pass." Like, no. Like, dude, the guy's 6'4", 230 fucking pounds, 235. Like, if a 5'8" fucking slot DB is really causing you to not be able to catch the ball, like maybe you're not that good of a jump ball player, right? And like then you add in the fact that they traded pick 32 for him, knowingly trying to tank after getting rid of Roquan. It's like, damn, bro, not a great move. But with that all being said, I do think he's a guy that you can throw the ball up to, right? And like, I think he's a mid-level 2. He's not going to be a number 1 in my opinion. But if
I think
he's like a high end 2, right? But I always said it like maybe not last year, but 2-3 years ago, the Giants had like Sterling Shepard and Golden Tate and a couple other guys. And I'm like, you know what? That's not a terrible receiving core. Like, it's not great. You don't have that guy, but like you do have 3 guys that are all pretty good players, right? Like ball players. And I'm fine with the Bears having a situation like that as long as the offensive line is elite. Not good, but fucking elite, because you have the money and resources to make sure it is.
Well, and I think where that works with Chase Claypool in a situation like that is he has to get timing down with Justin Fields, because it seems like that was a really big issue on their routes. We always saw reports about Justin Fields working with fucking Chase Claypool after practice and all that, and like all the things you said about Chase Claypool, I agree with. I don't think he uses his long arms enough. I don't think he fucking tries to actually go out and catch a football, and I think his route running is probably a little overhyped.
He doesn't run routes.
And that's what I mean. Like when you have a guy like that, you have to make up for that route running somewhere, because you can't just have him run goes every single fucking time. So like that's where timing comes into place, and it was just very obvious the timing wasn't there. Now, when you watch a guy like Darnell Mooney and Justin Fields, timing's 100% there. When you watch Cole Kmet and Justin Fields, timing's 100% there because they've played together for a while now. But when it came to everybody else, that's where you kind of saw that disconnect. And I think you even saw it a little bit with Velus whenever he was in the game, because there were opportunities for Velus to really kind of take off. And that's a guy who I think could be good as those fresh legs off the bench every once in a while to be able to come in, maybe be in the slot as well. But I mean, regardless, I think with where we are with Claypool, I think that might take a guy like N'Keal Harry out of the equation, because I think we are going to go to the draft potentially in the mid round for a wide receiver. I think there's a lot of people who are really selling themselves on like Jackson Smith and Jigba and stuff like that. I don't think we're going to draft a wide receiver that high, just because I think we actually do have a decent little wide receiver class sitting here. Especially when you look at like a guy like Xavier Hutchinson, you look at a guy like Jalen Hyatt. Those are guys who are probably going to slip second, third round for.
You're really good on Hyatt, I know. Did you see that DJ and Bucky DJ made his list? I'm trying to think. No, DJ and Bucky, or maybe it's just Bucky. Those are my boys, but they have Jalen Hyatt ranked as the number 1 overall wide receiver prospect in the draft.
And I love that, because I agree with that. I think Jalen Hyatt is that good. I really don't know where his hype went. Like, I don't know how it disappeared from him, because what he was doing in the SEC especially was incredibly impressive. And you saw what he was doing against cornerbacks who are probably going to go on day 1 or day 2 and just consistently clapping cheeks. Like, he's a guy who, if he finds a way to fall, that's a guy we can't pass up. If we're sitting in the second round and there's a guy like Jalen Hyatt sitting there, you can't pass that pick. And, everyone will fucking sit around and be like, oh, how dare you draft another Tennessee wide receiver? You see how Velus played out. Like, I already know how that whole narrative is going to go, and it's bullshit. Like, I think you said it pretty well before we started recording, man. You don't look at the helmet, you look at the player, and Jalen Hyatt's a prime example of that. Does he have the size that you kind of want out of him? Probably not. I want to see what his measurables are going to look like at the combine, because I've seen people say that he's 6'2". I've seen people say that he's 5'11". You know, I think probably there's a little bit of truth in the middle somewhere in there. But like, I want to see what his measurables look like at the combine. I think that'll really do a lot for his draft stock, but whether it goes up or down, which honestly, if he was on the shorter side, it would go down and it would benefit us because I think he would fall to us in a situation like that. But like, if we make that pick, if he falls to us, which, like I said, would be an ideal situation, then we are going to be focusing a lot on Chase Claypool really being that fucking guy. Like we're going to be putting a lot of stock in Chase Claypool if that's the situation, because like we need that big body that can go down the field. And like it sucks that it sucks for a guy like N'Keal Harry, because like with Eknemary St. Brown getting re-signed back already, and with Claypool kind of sitting in that same type of role.
Still, to be honest.
What's that?
I think he gets cut still. He doesn't have anything guaranteed.
I don't know. I still think he's going to end up making the roster. I don't think we're going to bring back N'Keal Harry even for anything. I think he's going to hit the market. I mean, and that's unfortunate because I did see flashes from N'Keal Harry. You know, you saw a little bit what you saw at I think it was Arizona State from him. But it's just kind of one of those things. You know, it's a situation. A Google search does not say anything. Like, trust me, dude. Like, it's going to be the tell. Like, I've seen 6'2", I've seen 5'11", I've seen.
I will say his combine profile says 6 foot. So
he hasn't been to the combine yet.
I know, but that is I'm just saying that is his combine profile. So you would assume they're getting measurements from the school when they did it. Now, were they letting him wear his cleats when he got measured? I don't know. All I'm saying is if you're 6 foot 185, like, you could put 10 pounds of muscle on. That's a decent size for a wide receiver. So I'm guessing an NFL will get him to beef up a little bit.
I see with quarterbacks every year where like the measurements change. So like that's something I'm gonna wait till the combine to really comment on too much. But like I do think we do look in that direction, because like you have to look at, we did trade that for Claypool, and I could still see us try to make a run this year with fucking Claypool. I mean, it is what it is. We traded a high value pick for him, and he's a guy going into a contract year, so you kind of hope he goes in there with a little extra piss and vinegar. I think they're going to try to give him a little bit of the benefit of the doubt, because he kind of came mid-season, had to learn the playbook, had to work on timing. But like, I think if you're hitting week 5, week 6, and you're still not seeing it out of Claypool, like you have to start really, really looking. You have to start really reevaluating who your number one wide receiver is going to be for the foreseeable future, because like Claypool's almost for sure going to walk, because you're not going to be able to pay him anything he's going to want, and he's still probably going to end up wanting at least wide receiver 2 money. And when you have a guy like Darnell Mooney who should be paid that money, you absolutely cannot give that to Chase Claypool. So do you set up for a Marv Harrison next year? Do you set up for that wide receiver class? Do you try to go make a aggressive move? You know, it all still has to play out. And I think the next month is going to tell us a lot about how this draft strategy is going to go, because there are wide receivers on the trade market. There are guys who are cut candidates. I think, as much as he's a guy who gets injured, Keenan Allen's a guy who's been brought up quite a bit with the Chicago Bears. There's a lot of different scenarios that could play out there. And with how many players we see on those 1-year deals that Poles signed last year, there's a lot of guys moving out. So we're going to have a lot of guys that are going to need to move back in. So I'm really interested to see how that works out. I'm looking at a list, and I'm not going to call out the website, but for some reason they're saying that Bobby Massey is an expiring free agent for us.
But it's got to be over the cap, right?
No, I'm not going to say who, but he's sandwiched between fucking N'Keal Harry and David Montgomery. So it's not like it's an old one. Anyway, go ahead with whatever you're going on.
My thought is, realistically, you're probably not going to pay both Claypool and Mooney. So whoever you feel more confident with after this year is probably going to be the one that's getting extended. Maybe neither of them get extended either, right? Because like the wide receiver market is so fucking crazy to the point where, hey man, and even Christian Kirk, everyone thought it was nuts when he got paid $21 a year or whatever with incentives, but I think he earned that contract, to be honest. He had a great, great season. It's the first season.
I've always been a big Christian Kirk guy, so
I think his injuries were his thing for the most part, right? But like he had a full healthy season as a number 1 option with no DeAndre Hopkins coming in and out and stuff like that, right? Like he was supposed to be that number 1 guy, but then, they made a move for Hopkins, and they've invested a lot into that wide receiver room, actually. Rondale Moore got drafted pretty high. Christian Kirk got drafted. But what I'm getting at is I think you can draft wide receivers as early and often as you would like. I think it should be a draft strategy moving forward for a lot of teams until the wide receiver market calms the fuck down, because you're going to have to pay in 2 years from now. It's going to be like 30 million to sign a decent wide receiver one, like what Allen Robinson was for us a few years ago, right? Like it's going to take that. So I think if you want to just keep drafting and developing receivers and until you get one that's like a diamond in the rough, Randy Moss type motherfucker, you know what I mean? Like then you pay him that money, but otherwise, just keep the room young, make sure Fields is developed, get a lot of talented guys for him. So I don't care that they invested a 32nd overall pick in Claypool and a third rounder last year in Velus Jones. Like, keep filling the room with talent, because you realistically, after this year, you're going to either lose one or both of Chase Claypool and Darnell Mooney. I mean, maybe they sign them both. I would be very surprised if that happened. But yeah, man. And that's, you say JSN. JSN was a really, really good player, and he was injured all year. And while I don't think he's the best player in the draft, that's someone that has some continuity. I know that him and Fields overlapped a little bit, but it wasn't like that was his main guy, right? That was more of CJ Stroud's main guy in his first year starting. But either way, like they know each other. Justin Fields went out and mentioned he would like in that Part of My Take episode, he said he was like, hey, if we could draft JSN, that would be dope. But I also know Jalen Carter and Will Anderson are really heavy prospects and we need help on the D line. But that's my thought process. And I think it's a good transition into the draft itself. Like, I would be okay with trading down to pick 13 or 16 or something like that. Trade down once, get a couple firsts, trade down again, and then put yourself in line to grab someone like a JSN or a Jordan Addison. Like, I'd be totally fucking okay with that, because right now, and I think it's going to be for the future too, it's going to be a lot harder to find wide receivers via free agency than you are going to be able to find offensive linemen. Like offensive linemen that are getting a little bit older, where with a team like Baltimore or a team like Philly or one of those teams, like they'll be fine replacing them and letting an older guy walk, where you could find that Band-Aid for a year, where your best Band-Aid last year was DJ Chark. And while we both really like him, he's not, you know what I mean? Like, you got to give up an arm and a leg to get a fucking receiver. Look at what the Dolphins gave up for Tyreek Hill. Look at what Vegas gave up for Devontae Adams, right? Like the Cardinals are the only fucking idiots that just gave up a second rounder or whatever Houston was Bill O'Brien gave up the best receiver in the league for a second rounder, but you won't see that happen. You won't see that happen again, because I don't even think a second rounder for Chase Claypool is crazy. The fact that we lost out and fucking got the first overall pick, so what really qualifies as number 32 overall, that makes it look really bad. But like, if we finish the season 7-10 or something like that, and had the 13th overall pick, you know what I mean, and that turned into, instead of 32, it turned into like 45. I'd be like, all right, that's not terrible, right? Like, because that's how much wide receivers cost right now. So yeah, dude, I think you can draft Jalen Hyatt if you pick up an extra second round pick from Houston or Tennessee, because a guy like Jalen Hyatt, like if he makes it out of the first round, which I think he's going to get a lot more hype going into it, and a team like maybe the Chargers or the Giants, someone at the back end of that first round is going to be like, you know what, fuck it, I'll pull the trigger on him. I feel like if you're there sitting at 35 or something because you traded back with the Colts, like I think it's more than warranted for you to pick him up. The reality is, unless prospects are unbelievable and they fall a far way down that board, and you have them as a first round prospect and you're in the middle of the second, and say they're, like we were talking about last week, like they're a corner, like you kind of got to take that guy then, right? But otherwise, I would be totally okay walking away from this draft seeing that the only positions that were drafted were wide receiver, offensive line, and defensive line. I'd be totally okay with that. Maybe a couple linebackers sprinkled in at the end of the draft because they usually fall a little bit more. Like I'm fine with that, right? Like, look at all the best teams. They're all built from the line back. And as much as people don't want to admit it and think you need like a flashy wide receiver one, it's great to have it. But A.J. Brown and Jalen Hurts are not having the success they had unless they had that offensive line. That offensive line was unbelievable. And so was the Chiefs offensive line. That's the two teams that played in the Super Bowl.
Yeah, I mean, I guess like the way I'm looking at the draft right now is I'm fine pushing the tire down the road for another year. I guess that's where I'm at. I think
The standard.
if it were up to me, like if you know before the league year starts the kind of return you're going to get on this first overall pick, and you know you're going to get set with say um a second round pick next, or another first round pick next year and another first round pick the year after, because like we've seen just in recent memory some of these draft day trades or some of the trades going into the draft where teams have really kind of pushed all their chips in to try to get their franchise quarterback. And like you look at a team like the Colts and you look at a team like the Texans, who are even just sitting one pick below us, they're going to want to crack at one of those guys. You know what I mean? I think Will Levis's hype might fall a little bit, but I think you have Stroud and you have Bryce Young at the top of the draft, and I don't think there's a scenario where those aren't the first two picks off the board. You know, just with where we have how many teams need a franchise quarterback, so I think you can leverage that into setting yourself up for the future for the next 2 years. I really think the best case scenario we can come out of this draft is getting even if we like traded with the Colts and the Colts were crazy enough to give us a first round pick in 2024 and 2025, I'd be fine with sticking at 4 and drafting with that pick at that point. If we don't get something like that and say we were to trade to 4, I'd be fine with moving that pick again and moving that pick again and moving that pick again. Maybe not for draft capital this year per se, but draft capital in the next 2 years of the draft, because you have enough money in free agency right now. And I'm not saying you want to build the entire team in free agency, but you have enough money to see if Justin Fields is the guy. You know, you had your little year where you were cute with free agency. You didn't spend a lot of money and you gutted the roster, opened up a lot of cap space, and that's totally fine. You know, we kind of, like we said multiple times, we gave Ryan Poles kind of that like mulligan year to kind of mold his roster the way he wanted, even if he didn't do it in the way we wanted him to do it. You have some money. There are some guys out there that can immediately change this team, and they're not even like first round free agency guys, but like that's where you spend some of that money, because you can spend money this year and still have money left over going into next year to be able to continue to elevate positions. If you can see that Justin Fields is the quarterback this year, if Justin Fields can prove that he is the guy this year with some talent around him, you're sitting the next 2 years with 2 first round picks in each year. That's where if you hit a situation where you want to jump the gun, well, I don't want to say jump the gun because that would mean we're making a bad decision. But like, say Justin has like an all-pro type year, like he has a fucking season like Jalen Hurts has, even if we're not making a run in the playoffs or anything like that, like has that scope of a fucking year and like really develops as a passer, and we really think he's a franchise guy, and you want to start looking at fucking maybe negotiating that contract, because it kind of makes sense to maybe jump at that now before he kind of maybe earns more on the next year. If you were to end up having to pay a guy like Justin right there, you have 2 first round picks in the next 2 years of the draft to replace positions that you aren't able to pay otherwise. And that's where you need to kind of kick that tire down the road, because we still have time on Justin's rookie deal before we have to start making those tough decisions on other players on the roster if Justin ends up developing into that quarterback. So I really think getting draft capital for the next 2 years is going to set us up to be able to do that. That's something the Kansas City Chiefs has done incredibly well, and something they're going to continue to do is continue to move draft capital down the line. So while they have to continue to eat money on that Patrick Mahomes deal, they can find ways to restructure every single year where they're giving them guaranteed money that'll open up cap space on a year-to-year basis, and you're able to replace positions of need through the draft with good drafting. And with what I could say from Ryan Poles, as much as drafting defensive players with the first 2 picks bothered a lot of people, he got a pretty decent haul on his draft last year. So like if he was able to have a similar haul on this draft, and we start getting convinced that Ryan Poles is a guy who could definitely find some diamonds in the rough, and I think Braxton Jones is looking like a really good example of that. If we don't even want to bring up Jack Sanborn, who was undrafted, like we can run that type of model that Kansas City ran, and that's exactly where he came from. Like I really think that's something that we can try to mess around with. Is that what we're going to do exactly? I'm not entirely sure, but if I'm Ryan Poles, I try to get this figured out. I want to gauge my fucking market before I hit free agency. Once I see that I can get a haul for that pick for the foreseeable future to really help the franchise in the long term, I'm spending a little bit money in this fucking free agent class. I'm finding diamonds in the rough throughout this draft, because even if you were to trade back on that first pick And even if you got the Colts to send you that pick, you could still get a really good player in the first round, and you still have the rest of your draft. It's not like we're trading away later capital in this draft. We're still going to be able to have a full draft this year. I really think that would set us up great for the long term. And I think having a year where maybe we don't necessarily have like Super Bowl aspirations per se, but a year where we can see what Justin Fields can do in a fucking good NFL offense would tell us a lot about the next 2 years. And let's say we hit the flip side. Justin busts hard. And I'm not saying I think this is going to happen. I'm saying you have to be prepared for that. If that were to happen, you have 2 first-round picks next year to figure out the quarterback position. It's a good thing to set it up with. I understand people are going to want that instant gratification this year of getting players in the first round or getting a haul of picks for this year's draft, but I'm all about pushing this tire down the road because I don't think we're going to hover. Even if we're bad next year, we're not going to get the first overall pick again. We need to take advantage of what this is. We need to look at what other teams have done in similar situations, like say the Rams did when they traded that RG3 pick, and we need to really run with that. Because we need to look at that model of looking at the long term. We can't continue to hire GMs, have this like 1 to 2 year bubble, and then try to go all in, fail miserably, and start over again because it's a never ending cycle. Otherwise, we need to really look at the long term here.
Yeah, and you'll never find someone that's going to advocate for trading down as much as possible than me, specifically in this year. Right. Because you're in a very unique position, and like to provide some context to what type of hype, because I think it's really important, right? Like if we're looking at Kenny Pickett and who's the kid that went to Tennessee? Is it Malik Willis or is that the kid from Louisville this year?
No, Malik Willis went to I think he went to Liberty, didn't he?
Liberty? Okay. Maybe Cunningham. Either way, like there was a couple prospects that were good, but like when you looked at their draft hype going into the draft, it's like, yeah, they could be a first rounder, right? We're seeing a different attitude towards Stroud and towards Bryce Young specifically, right? Will Levis, I think, is intriguing because he does have a lot of traits, and hey, if someone wants to fucking buy fool's gold, they're willing to buy it, right? Like if someone were to trade up and take Will Levis 1 overall because they think in 3 years he's the next Josh Allen ruined teams because it's like, oh yeah, we can have a 3-year. It's like, no, that was a very unique situation. He was in a test tube meant for growth. Like he was in an incubator.
To that point though, that is a good example of why people should be a little bit more patient with their fucking young quarterbacks, because like we do see too many situations of teams just giving up on a young quarterback in year 2, and it really rubs me the wrong way because like you see so many of the greats from the past kind of jump into that. Go ahead, Lucas. I didn't mean to cut off your point, but
no, you're good. I think people are just taking out the human element of, just think of the movie Draft Day. Your owner wants you to make a fucking splash. Like we need to sell tickets. I don't care about first round picks in 24 and 25. I care that people are wearing a jersey in this stadium when it's full, right? Like quarterbacks have that power. And what I'm getting at right here is okay. So if you have a prospect that's like a Trevor Lawrence or a Andrew Luck or a Peyton Manning, right? Those are some surefire number 1 guys that came out that, hey, they're going to go number 1 no matter what. I would say Bryce Young is a step below them right now, right? Like in terms of draft grade and what you're seeing about him, hype going into it, like Trevor Lawrence had a bit more hype. But it's not like the difference between Bryce Young to Trevor Lawrence is the same difference between Bryce Young to Zach Wilson, in my opinion, right? And Zach Wilson got a lot of fucking hype coming out. And if you just look at their draft grades, it kind of coordinates with that, right? Like, and I typically don't look at like PFF or any of those things, but when it comes to NFL.com draft grades, when it's my boy Bucky Brooks and DJ that are going, like they're putting their stamp on it, I give it a little bit more weight, right? So a Trevor Lawrence is graded at like a 7.4, a Zach Wilson is graded at like a 6.5, and a Bryce Young is graded at like a 6.9, right? So it's like that middle ground. So more than a reasonable enough amount of hype. And unless he loses a finger in a fucking Jason Pierre-Paul incident, like that hype is there. It's real, and he's being looked at as a number 1 overall pick. So with that, in my opinion, if you don't get two extra first rounders, so a pick swap and two extra first rounders, you failed as a GM. Because if you look at it, like when a guy like Trevor Lawrence, that's what I was getting at, or Andrew Luck comes around, you're not trading out of that pick. If Trevor Lawrence is in this draft, the Bears probably trade or draft Trevor Lawrence and trade Justin Fields. Like, let's just be real here, right? Trevor Lawrence was considered as close to a perfect prospect, right? It went from Elway to Manning to Luck to Lawrence. Those were the like four guys that I remember that were like, you cannot miss on this guy, right? Like there's no can't miss prospect, but it's close to can't miss as you can be at the most important position. Those picks don't get traded. You would have to saw off your arm to try to get to one of those guys, right? But let's look at some of the trades throughout the years. To get Mahomes, and this is to move from 22 to 10, they used 22, 27, and 91. So they gave up 2 first-round picks and a third-rounder, right? Ryan Leaf in 1998, they gave up picks 8, 33. I'm sorry. It was to get to pick 2. It was 8, 33. I'm sorry, 8, 3, and 33 the next year, and then 2 extra guys, right? So it's hard to determine value when guys are put in there. For RG3, 3 first-round picks to move up from 2 to 6. And I do think RG3 is a little bit more, or to move up from 6 to 2. I think RG3 is a little bit more of a better prospect than Bryce Young, but it took 3 1s and a 2 to move up for RG3. Jared Goff, it took 2 1s, 2 2s, and 2 3s to move up from 15 to 1, right? Like the proof is in the pudding. Those trades have happened. Trey Lance, the 3rd overall prospect, who is rated like a 6.3 coming out of college, he got 3 1s and a 3. And I know that you have to kind of factor in, okay, well, San Fran they're a better team, so those ones aren't going to be as valuable as a team like the Panthers or the Colts or the Texans right now, right? Like those guys can be top 5 picks next year.
God, I wish I just had the clip of the Rams owner just saying "fuck them picks," but keep going.
But you get what I'm saying, right? Like those trades have already happened, and there's enough hype behind this quarterback class where the value matches up, right? And if you look, there's the Jimmy Johnson fucking trade value chart, and it's not something that you should live and die by. But if you look at it in terms of value, right, to go from the number 1 pick to the number 4 pick, it's considered 3,000 points of value for the number 1 pick. The number 4 pick, I believe, is 1,200 or 1,600, right? So you're getting half the value moving down 3 spots. People are not understanding the gravity of like what it actually means to move from spot 1 to move to spot 22 or something like that. Like you would have to fucking, if the Giants wanted to move up, they'd have to trade us their whole fucking draft. They'd have to pull a Mike Ditka, trade us their whole draft and first rounders the next 2 years to really make up for that value. And a lot of times when you look at the value, you give them credit for middle of the second round because you don't know in terms of draft class next year. You lose some value because you're essentially like paying layaway, right? And then they can be a great team. So if it's pick 32, like now I got fucked over, right? So you're going to have to overpay to get the guy you want. And the reality is if the Colts are offering that much, which it seems like Jim Irsay is fucking drunk off his ass, just saying, I love Bryce Young. We need a young quarterback. Peyton Manning saved my franchise and so did Andrew Luck. And now Bryce Young's going to do it. You better fucking believe Houston has to come up with the exact same amount. So while people are saying like, oh, we're not going to be able to get a haul. No, we should get a haul. And if we don't get a haul, something went seriously wrong with the Chicago Bears. Like that's my personal fucking thought on it. And to me, in an ideal world, you trade from 1 to 4, you pick up 2 extra 1s and they're 2. That's asking for a lot, but I'm telling you, dude, you're essentially saying if you believe Bryce Young is the guy, which your owner does, we're going to hand you the keys to the next 20 years of your franchise. What is 2 first-round picks in a second, right? Like that's how you have to break it down, right? Like there's a human element to this. The seats need to be filled, all of that shit. And then you're sitting there at 4 and someone like Houston is like, you know what? We didn't get Bryce Young. Fuck it. We're going to go with Will Anderson. Now we're sitting there with Stroud waiting for us. And now we can trade back to 9 or 7 or 8 and pick up a couple extra second rounders as well. Right now we're fucking stacked for the next 2 years and you have the flexibility to do whatever you want. And just to bring it all full circle, look at what the Chiefs do and look at what the Eagles do. The Eagles and Chiefs have had some of the best trade up and downs in the first, second, and third rounds that you have seen. And the Eagles are a little bit more pressed against the cap because they got more veterans, but the Chiefs are operating 27,000 under the cap. They have 27,000. You would think you're paying your quarterback the most money in the fucking league that they were for sure having to make cuts. No, they're good. They can make 2 moves and be okay and pay their draft class. Like, you're exactly right. When you have to pay a quarterback, first of all, that quarterback has to be good enough to elevate young players. But second of all, that's what you have to evaluate this year. But second of all, you have to make sure that you keep bringing in those young players with high profiles that you're able to get. I mean, look at dude, fucking Kadarius Toney was a first round pick. They got him for nothing, right? Like, you have to be crafty in the way you construct your team after you pay your quarterback. It's easy to do shit when you're in the rookie window because you can pay your quarterback $12 million. But when that number jumps from 12 to 50 and he's taking up damn near a quarter of your salary cap, that's when shit gets difficult, right? That's when you see teams like the Saints who kept restructuring and now they're 50 million in the negative, or the Packers who just had to release half their fucking defense, right? Like, that's
while Aaron Rodgers was on a spiritual retreat, mind you. He locked himself in a room and caked his own farts for 4 fucking days in the absolute darkness.
I'm not gonna lie, dude. 4 days in a dark room. That's like, you're either gonna go fucking crazy or you're gonna find out a lot about yourself.
Yeah, I have a theory that there is a way to find out a lot about yourself. I'm just gonna stop there because that actually sounds like it was going in a way different direction than I thought it was gonna go.
Putting a firm thumbprint on your butthole, like, what do you?
Yeah, say? I was gonna say, don't break your wrist. But anyway, and I said it before the show, Lucas, like, to kind of roll around your points, because I feel like me and you are kind of on the same page with how we kind of want the Bears to push the tire down the road a little bit while still being able to find value in this draft, because there's still value to be found. And, I think these valuations, they're not crazy. When we talk about getting multiple first round picks, like, the proof is in the pudding. It's happened before.
Offer it, go farther down.
If I'm Ryan Poles, I'm changing my voicemail on my phone to one statement and one statement only. How much are you willing to pay for your franchise quarterback? And I'm asking every single team that tries to come into a trade offer and lowball me, I will end that call by saying, how much are you willing to pay for a franchise quarterback? Like, I'm saying, repeat this over and over and over again. Play fucking hardball, because you have all the leverage. Because, like, that pick will get traded. Teams aren't going to just be like, no, fuck that. Fuck Ryan Poles, fuck the Bears. We're not going to do business with you. It's like, oh no, you're going to do business. You don't have a choice. You want that franchise quarterback. We'll draft his ass, and then we'll hold leverage. And if we draft a fucking quarterback, then we really got leverage over you motherfuckers who wanted him. You know what I mean? Like,
I think realistically, right? Like, there are some arguments to be made for, like, hey, Will Anderson and Jalen Carter are both very good, and I think we both agree Jalen Carter is much better than Will Anderson. I think Will Anderson's a little bit overhyped while his production is great, and I think he's going to be a good player in the NFL. Don't get me wrong. He's going to be a very good player. But I don't think he is I don't think him or Carter are the type of players that you would pass on a haul of future draft capital for, just to select them, right? And I'm not talking like, oh, well, we got to stay in range at 2 so we can get Will Anderson. Like, listen, we need more than a fucking pass rusher on that defense.
Yeah.
One linebacker right now, and he had a great, he played well in that role. But, like, we don't know if Jack Sanborn's going to be the fucking 15-year middle linebacker, Chicago Bears tradition, like, torch holder. I know Duke feels that way, but, like,
well, it would require Ryan Poles to actually pay a linebacker, but I digress.
We need a lot of spaces to be filled, and the most important thing right now is Justin Fields and the future of this franchise. There is no reason to sit through a season where you lose as much as you did to then just be like, yeah, fuck it, we fixed it now. We got Jalen Carter. We won. And realistically, with all the bullshit that's coming out about his character issues and blah, 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 you might be able to get him at, like, pick 7. Like, that shit happens all the time. Kayvon Thibodeau was supposed to be the number 1 overall pick, and then he fell to, like, 6 or 7 because of character issues or whatever it was, which we kind of saw him doing snow angels next to fucking, like, Nick Foles seizing or whatever that was. So
yeah, and he was talking shit to Jeff Saturday in the offseason, which was dumb, and he was talking shit to Joe Staley during the offseason, which was dumb. Like,
yeah, he was like, who are you, little bro? And it's like, whoa, that's
okay, future Hall of Famer, buddy. He's probably chill.
In, like, the 2010s. Yeah, like, what are you talking about, bro?
Yeah, I will say, though, because I got to put my stamp on this, I was always a bigger Aiden Hutchinson guy than Thibodeau, but I digress. It just sucks that he's with fucking Detroit.
Hutchinson's got a good motor, and that's what I like. I want to see all of the traits. If I am looking at a number one player, like, yes, Will Anderson looks. I almost called him Will Smith because of our fucking boy that posted that the other day. But Will Anderson looks the part. He looks like a prototypical number one overall edge rusher. But you know who else looked that way? Jadeveon Clowney, right? And I think Will Anderson's motor is not the most encouraging. I think Jalen Carter's the best player in this draft by a wide margin, but I'm hoping NFL GMs think it's Bryce Young. But yeah, I just think like the production is there, and you can see when they draw up opportunities for him when he's stunting, efforts 100%. But on that backside pursuit, man, I mean, we're talking about backside pursuit is important because that takes those plays where guard got out on the guard got out to the second level. And now it's a 28-yard play that takes it from a 28-yard play to a 10-yard play, right? Like it's that backside pursuit is extremely fucking important. And I just felt like anytime they were rolling away from him, I watched Tennessee and Georgia games, didn't seem like he had that same type of burst. Maybe he was tired, right? I know Myles Garrett had similar knocks coming out, but I think Myles Garrett was also a much more insane prospect.
Yeah, I mean, Myles Garrett kind of had that like Von Miller type build where it's like this is a guy you legitimately can't pass on because he's got that generational like build, talent, like whole combination,
everything. And that's kind of why I said what I said, right? Like I don't think like you need to stay at 2 or 4 in order to get one of these guys. I think you could trade down to pick fucking 9, 8, 7. I think the most important thing there is stacking as much capital as possible. And if you were to trade down to like 7 for with the Raiders, I mean, you're talking about that's first, second, third round value in the next 2 first rounders you have. Like that's the type of fucking value it is to move from 7 to 1 because it's very rare. I don't think I've ever, now that I think about it, seen a situation where there's a guy is hyped up at the quarterback position where number one, like they already have it. I think the only one was the Jared Goff one.
Yeah. No, I wanted to touch on the Jalen Carter point because we brought him up and I didn't really get a chance to talk about that. So like with that whole situation, because there's a lot of people who are going to say Will Anderson is the better player.
No, he's not.
And there's going to be a lot of people. And what I get it from is, and I see it. I see it when Jalen Carter started becoming a bigger prospect and more people started getting eyes on him, especially Bears fans. I started seeing it on Twitter a little bit more. You'll see those lack of hustle comments in like the first quarter, but they won't watch the whole game because what makes Jalen Carter so fucking great is he wears on offensive linemen throughout the first half. And by the time you hit the third quarter, he is just absolutely destroying everybody on the field because they've had to deal with him. They've had to double team him. They've had to get creative with how they're going to chip him. They've had to find different ways. Like he's a guy you can't trap because if you attempt to trap him, he will fucking move down the line of scrimmage and he will eat you alive. Like that, and that's the type of guy. Like
he was Georgia's best player last year on that defense. He was the linchpin that held it all together.
Legitimately, if you ask every team that played both Georgia and Alabama over the past 2 years who the worst fucking player they had to game plan for, if you asked an offensive coordinator who they had to game plan for the most and who was the biggest matchup nightmare, I would bet to say that at least 90% of them said Jalen Carter because Jalen Carter is that much of an issue in the middle.
Well, he saw more bodies regularly than Will Anderson.
Yeah. And I mean, the way I like to compare it, and I'm going to continue to use this fucking comparison, is he reminds me of Ed Oliver in the SEC. Like are his numbers going to pop off the board? No, because he plays in the SEC. Some of the greatest players who have ever been drafted out of the SEC, especially on the interior defensive line, they don't have fucking all-star insane numbers. It's because it's the best division in college football, and you're playing against nothing but NFL star talent on every given Saturday. But what he does is he wears down an interior of a defensive line. And that's what you want from that position. And I think when you get opportunities for him to fucking start moving through a guard who has just had the absolute shit beaten out of him throughout the entire game, that's where you start seeing impact plays in the most important portions of the game. Like any guy can go, like, well, I don't want to say any guy, but any big dude who's talented can go to a weaker division in college football and play against guys who are not going to be playing on Sundays at any point and could put up their entire stat line in the first half Jalen Carter didn't have that fucking ability because offensive coordinators are a lot better in the SEC. Interior offensive linemen are a lot better in the SEC. And game planning goes a long way with dealing with guys like that. And I can assure you, by the time it hits that third quarter, every offensive coordinator who wants to either establish the run or try to fucking get who wants to have a 5-step drop is pulling their hair out having to deal with Jalen Carter, because if they put more attention on him, it opens up everybody else on a defense, which on an NFL team, that's very good. That's something that a guy like Aaron Donald does, and even a guy like Ed Oliver does in Buffalo, which is why the Buffalo defense runs as well as it does. And it also opens up to the fact that if you try to single team him at any point because you're just that desperate, because you can't just continue to double team him and let other people get free releases, you're going to see him absolutely eat a guard alive because he's been dealing with them all day. Like, he is somebody who over the course of a game will get better. And that's why people who only glance at college football games will not understand why Jalen Carter is at the top of this draft. It's because if you watch the first quarter, you're not going to see it. If you watch to the third, fourth quarter, you're going to realize how dominant he is, and you're going to realize how much of a game changer he can be to a defense.
Well, and I think another thing that's really getting, because everyone's like, oh, 3 technique versus edge rusher, right? Like, 2 very important positions that we need both of them. So that's what the debate is. But I think in terms of positional versatility, Jalen Carter, I mean, he could play all four spots of the line, whether it's you're in base or in nickel, right? Like, I think you can move him up and down the line as you please. He's a lot bigger than Aaron Donald, and I'm not making an Aaron Donald comparison, but very quick, very good with his hands. If you need to bounce him outside because you like the matchup against the right tackle, or move him to nose to say, hey, you know what, I think he's going to just destroy this center, you can do that, right? Like, and you can move, because realistically, when you try to move a guy like Khalil Mack inside, while he's great at setting the edge and playing contain, he's not going to be able to take on 2 offensive linemen, right? Like, you don't have that versatility. You have that versatility with Jalen Carter. You don't have it with Will Anderson. I think he could play a very, very prominent role in the NFL for a long time. And that's not to say Anderson isn't a great prospect. He is. But when you're asking me my preference, give me the 300-pound guy that fucking moves like that's how Warren Sapp was, dude. Really, really quick feet, enormous human being. Give me the 300-pound guy that, my coach Minzer, I wonder how he's doing. He was the defensive line coach for varsity when I was a freshman, and he used to say, you need to be like a mix between a fucking gorilla and a Russian gymnast when you play the defensive line. And it's 100% true. Like, you need to have really good feet, balance, all of that shit, be able to split blocks, but you need to have sheer power. You need to be a freak, right? So, and I think Jalen Carter is just a better prospect in general, right? Like, if they were to hang out and stick and pick at one, I would be a lot less upset if it was Jalen Carter than if it were Will Anderson.
Yeah, and I mean, I agree with you with the points you were making a little bit earlier, where like Jalen Carter is a guy that you can get probably a little bit to the mid late part of the top 10 of the draft. So like, if we were to hit an ideal scenario, and I still like, the reason I've beat this drum so much is because I don't think it's outside the realm of possibility. Like, if we were to get that Colts pick and 2 future 2 firsts from them, or even a 2024 first and a second, you know what I mean? Like that, like a nice little haul. I'm fine with sticking at 4 and drafting a Jalen Carter, because at that point you've gotten your value and you come away with one of the best prospects in the draft, or in my opinion, the best prospect in the draft. Like and as much as people like, I understand like drafting another defensive player with that pick would have people up in fucking arms. Like, people would be freaking out about that, but that would be one where Ryan Poles, I'd have to give him a lot of credit for genuinely taking the best person available at a position that we genuinely really need it. People talk about not wanting to pay a guy like Roquan Smith, and that's an argument that we've already fucking had about 1,000 times, and we'll probably bring it up later down the line because it's just going to happen. It's one of those situations. But when you don't have that interior up front, you can't put just anybody at linebacker. Like Jack Sanborn, he played really well, but he played well despite what was in front of him. You know what I mean? Like, you can say whatever you want about Justin Jones. That's another guy who has potential being cut. Like, if we're being honest, for cap savings. You know what I mean? He was a guy who had spurts, looked all right, but is that a guy that you really think is someone who's going to fucking carry us over? They're like, it's a situation where, like, if you have a guy there and you have your draft capital set and you have money to spend that you could toss at the offensive line and the offensive side of the football with draft capital moving forward, if you have your franchise quarterback, which you'll realize after this year if Justin's the franchise quarterback or not, then taking a defensive player there seems pretty harmless to me, especially a guy like Jalen Carter, who, we brought up Aaron Donald and Warren Sapp. I'm not saying those are direct comparisons on our end, but like there is an impact there that we see that Jalen Carter could be. And that type of potential is exactly what you want in the top 5 of the fucking draft,
Yeah, and I think the biggest threat to Jalen Carter not leaving the top 5 is Seattle, right? But I think when you're looking at these mock drafts, every single time it's slotted in, okay, Will Anderson to the Cardinal, Jalen Carter to the Cardinals, right? It's always one of those two guys that's getting picked by the Cardinals, and it's kind of setting the precedent for the rest of the mocks. What's to stop them from, like, they need a fucking corner too. Like, what's to stop them from getting the best corner in the draft if they feel like they want to shore up their defensive backfield? Or what's to stop them from trading out? Maybe they want to pick up a little bit of extra capital because they just paid Kyler, right? Like, so now you're in that situation where Seattle's got to, and then the same thing too with Seattle. Maybe they really like Anthony Richardson, and they're like, yeah, we got Geno, but now we can, like someone like Seattle or Detroit is probably the right spot for those guys like Will Anderson and Anthony Richardson, because you have time to let them cook. You don't have to bring them on right away, right?
So yeah, no, and I think that's where you fall into that scenario where that's where a team would move up for like a Will Levis. I don't think that a team's going to stick and pick for him, like especially in the top 10. But like I think if he does go that high, it's going to be a team that's like, all right, maybe we go the Mahomes route where it's like we really fucking like this arm talent. We have a guy that we already have in place who could hold it down for a year, and this guy can just learn the entire NFL playbook. That's where a team that's already kind of well off at the quarterback position trades up to go get a guy that they think is the future. You know what I mean?
Well, and I mean, the NFL draft is such a fucking crapshoot. Like, there's so many smoke screens being put out right now by all of these teams. Irsay might not even like Bryce Young. Irsay might love Will Levis, right? And he's just saying that. Like, maybe he's playing the game. I'm just getting big, like, New York Jets owner from draft day vibes. Kevin, I'm trying to think of his name, but I'm getting big.
How many times have you watched draft day in like the last month? And be honest,
30. Once a day. Zach Charbonnet, no matter what. But no, yeah, I mean, we're running kind of long now, so we can't really get into the draft prospects. I guess we could just talk about it like this. But I do think it's a shock every year, right? Like you said, I wouldn't expect a team to stick and pick a team like Will Levis, though, that they're probably going to get traded up for. I didn't expect the fucking Giants to take Daniel Jones with their first pick at 6 overall, but they did, right? Like, quarterbacks change things drastically. And Detroit plans on being a good team, and so does Seattle. Both of their 5 and 6 picks are from teams that they got for selling their quarterback, right? And like their picks are in the 20s and 18 and 20, I think, right? Like, they both plan on being good next year. So they're not going to be in striking distance. If you're looking at it and you're like, man, we got Goff, we got Geno, they're both playing well, right? Like, they both had good seasons, but we can upgrade there if we develop a guy right. Like, I could see 5 and 6 being fucking Will Levis and Anthony Richardson. I could see there's a chance where the first quarterback goes 1, and then if it's not Houston, they're like, you know what? Fuck it. We'll take Will Anderson. Like, we just hired DeMeco Ryans. We have a Patriots, former Patriots GM, right? Like I could see them going with a fucking defensive player because they have 2 first-round picks too. So it's like nothing's off the table when it comes to the NFL draft. And anytime you see these like mock drafts and shit like that, even the best mock drafters after the top 10, it's like the wild, wild west. You maybe get 1 or 2 picks right to the right team, right? There's so many trades that happen. Guys will move up 2 spots. They'll move down 2 spots. Like,
guys will have free falls that have no business free falling.
There was even a trade for Julio Jones when the Falcons traded up. They gave up like 2 1s and a 2 to get Julio Jones from 22 to 6. And that's a wide receiver. And don't get me wrong, Julio was a
God, I make that. If I know I'm getting Julio Jones for 10 years, I'm making that trade 10 times out of 10.
Julio had big meat coming out. I don't want to undersell what he was as a wide receiver prospect. Like, he was a can't miss prospect. Everyone knew Julio was going to be an absolute fucking stud.
Yeah, no doubt.
But, it's kind of one of those things. And it's like we said, dude, you want to have positional versatility because the one year that Kansas City traded up for Patrick Mahomes, they had 2 first-round picks. They didn't fuck up their next year's draft. And that's what you want to make sure you're doing. You want to set yourself up for the next 2 years where if there is one guy that you need to have, whether it's regardless of position, you can trade up without fucking up the rest of your draft. That should be the main goal of this draft, because we've had enough fucked up drafts in Chicago where it's like, hey man, it would be nice to go into a draft with 10 picks instead of fucking 6 or 4 or 3, right? Like, don't get to pick till picks 85 after we traded for Mac. Like it. Or if you have a first rounder laying around, you can get a guy like AJ Brown for a team that's pressed up against the cap, right? I know people are throwing out T. Higgins right now. I wouldn't consider him AJ Brown good, but I love me some Brandon Ayuk, and he's coming out, right? That's another thing too. I think you can get things done via trade. You trade back in the draft, and now San Francisco's like, shit, dude, we don't pick till 99. You got an extra second rounder. We got to pay Ayuk. You want to grab him from us? Yeah, we'll take your second rounder. Because then at that point, when you have teams that are trying to make their Super Bowl push, they'll buy high. The Bears are in a position where they can sell high. They don't need anyone. Like, they're not desperate in any way, shape, or form. They're just starting the rebuild. So that's why they should. Yeah. And like I said, if the Colts aren't willing to pay multiple first, then they should move down to the next guy that does. I don't care if we fall. Dude, I wouldn't give a fuck if we traded out of the first round altogether. That's where I'm at right now. Like, because I don't think the top end of this draft is nearly as good as next year's. And imagine if we were to trade with a team like the Texans or the Panthers or one of those teams, and it becomes a top 3 pick because they're just dog shit next year. And now you're in striking distance for Marvin Harrison Jr. without having to trade up or do anything, right? Like, that's another thing you want to keep in mind. You don't want to be getting the Jets first round picks. They're looking to win. You don't want to be getting the Lions first. Trading with the Lions shouldn't even be a fucking option. You should not give them you should never give a division rival. It's one thing if you trade with them in the 4th round so they can get a cornerback they like. You should never give them access to a quarterback that could ruin your life for the next 20 fucking years. Anyone that's had that suggestion because they're like, oh, we can get 6 and 18, dumb. Sorry, dumb. Not a good idea. I don't like 6 and 18 that much in this draft. I think there's a huge drop-off, and you're really starting to see some value finally in the second round. I think there's only about 4 or 5 prospects that are truly worthy of a top 10 pick in this draft.
Yep. I agree with all points. You went a little nuts there for a second, but I love it. I think there's I just fucking build for the future, please. Like, you have so much money. Like, you have so much money to spend this offseason. Like, spend some of that. That's disposable. Money can come back. Like, draft capital can't. Like, you want to sell jerseys? Go sign a fucking free agent. You'll sell jerseys. Like, I guarantee there are people
sell out. No matter what. You're the fucking Bears, dude. People were at the game in December when it was negative 17 degrees. Exactly.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. But I think that's a pretty good place for us to cut off. I mean, we are running at like a minute 15.
15? Check off.
Yeah, let's say we're running here, but we will be back next week. This is we're just gonna kind of continue churning away at this. We're probably gonna get a little bit more specific with some of the players we love in the draft. It's gonna be really hard to say as far as where these guys are gonna go. At least from my end, I think that's how I'm gonna kind of tackle it. I'm just gonna kind of look at a lot of the prospects I really like that have the potential to either falling to us or potentially a guy that we can get if we move down a little bit in the draft, but it's hard to put valuations of where we're going to get them. I see a lot of guys doing the mocks where they're straight picking where everyone is right now. And I just think that's just kind of a waste of time because it's just not going to look like that on draft day.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cause like I see a lot of people drafting for the Bears at 1 and it's like, come on. Damn well that's not going to happen anyway. Like, what are you doing? But I also think free agency moving forward, and I think we're going to start hearing a lot more rumors about that. We're going to start seeing teams cutting some players to save cap, even players they're not really going to want to get rid of. I always think of like Josh Sitton with the Packers as a guy they did not want to get rid of, but they were so fucking against the cap that they kind of had to make a move. So like there's going to be a lot of that. And free agency, we just talked about a lot of teams and their potential draft strategy. Free agency is going to change a lot of that. There's going to be teams who are going to land. There's going to be like 1 or 2 teams that are going to nail every single free agency signing they're looking at right now, and their entire draft strategy is going to drastically change because of it. And I think that's going to change a lot of valuations throughout the draft, because if we have another team that's near the top of the draft that hits on a lot of free agents that they want, they could potentially be like, hey, maybe we should start fucking getting some picks for the future. Maybe we should start trading down. You know what I mean? And there's a lot that's going to go into that, especially with the valuation of our pick. The valuation of the number one pick is always going to be high, but after trading back further, what other teams plan to do with their picks is going to change how we're going to be able to evaluate that. So it's going to be interesting.
What's that? I said trade back twice.
Yeah, no, dude, trade back more than twice if it's open. But like if teams are going to start getting competitive and we're going to start taking a little bit of a loss on some of these trades, that's when you stick and pick. You know what I mean? If you don't get that value with that pick, don't trade back just to trade back. Trade back if other teams aren't trading back and you're still kind of the guy that's open answering the phone calls, you know. But anyway, I think that's a good place to stop. Lucas, I don't know if you have any final thoughts.
Yeah, I think the only thing that would justify sticking and picking at one would be Ryan Poles coming out and saying, hey, we were not getting the value that was appropriate for the number one overall pick, so we just went ahead and picked the best guy we thought was in the draft. And they drafted Jalen Carter. Because that's true, dude. I don't want to move off from one just to pick up a couple like second rounders. Like, no. I don't want that. Like, get the first round. What would every other fucking quarterback draft has gotten to move up to that spot?
I mean, dude, even I always think of the 2006 draft when the fucking Houston Texans decided they were just going to draft Mario Williams. They're like, you know what? There's a ton of quarterbacks in this draft. There's a ton of talent in this draft. That was the Lionheart. That was the Vince Young. That was the Jay Cutler. That was the Reggie Bush draft. Like, there was a lot of talent at the top of that draft. It was very much a hype draft class. And Texans didn't get the fucking valuation they wanted. They drafted Mario Williams, and they happened to have drafted one of the best fucking edge rushers of his era. So, like, there's unbelievable. Yeah, and the Texans were definitely a team that could use that value, but if it's not there, don't force it. But anyway, that's been the Barely There pod. Like I said, we will be back next week. We are going to probably move forward all the way through to the draft. I mean, don't kill us if we have a week off here and there.
I'll be in Egypt for 2 weeks too, so we'll be back next week, and then we'll have to figure out if I'm just going to like record at. I don't even know what the time difference is.
Yeah, I might just run solo and just, you know, have direct eye contact with the entire crowd for about like an hour and not say anything, but who knows? We'll see. Might get real weird with it. Might try to like live stream Lucas from Egypt. We'll figure out.
8 hours. Well, they're 8 hours ahead is what I'm seeing. So realistically, if you were to do like a 5 o'clock, it'd be midnight my time. We could probably do one.
We'll figure her out. I mean, that's if the Wi-Fi even agrees. But anyway, this has been the Barely There podcast. I'm Duke Coughlin. Be sure to follow me at that pod guy Duke on Twitter. Also with Lucas Perfetti, the Ayatollah of Capicola. You follow him at Lucas Perfetti 46. Be sure to follow the podcast Barely There pod. I'm also thinking about starting to live stream this on Twitch. If you have any thoughts on that, let me know. But I think that's something we're gonna just kind of move towards because I'm starting to see a lot of other sports shows and whatnot move over to Twitch. So I think that's something we're going to be looking at here in the very near future. Be sure to subscribe on Spotify. We actually finally have a subscriber count on Spotify for how many people are subscribed over there. And numbers are looking pretty good, but I guarantee there's some people who are still listening over there that aren't subscribed. So hit that subscribe button. And I know all my Apple listeners and all those Google Play listeners who are just complete degenerates, they're listening too. I appreciate you. Lucas probably does too. But anyway, this has been Barely There.
And Miles Leonard for our boy. He's back, dude.
Oh,
do you remember that question and ask us anything?
Miles Leonard is no longer lost. He has been found in Milwaukee.
He's found, dude. He's got a job again. That's so nuts, dude.
That's I can't even open that can of worms.
Appreciate you.
There's a joke I really badly want to make, but I can't make it.
Be like a lap and subscribe on every platform if you're
every single thing. Hit the like button on YouTube too. Subscribe over there as well. Our YouTube numbers actually been looking pretty good as well. Want to continue to see that move in that direction. Maybe we'll start clipping some shorts or whatever. I actually found out there's a pretty easy way to do that. So might do that moving forward. Just kind of, you know, completely sell out. We might start selling fucking stickers and dumb shit. Who knows? But anyway, this has been Barely There and bear down.
Bear down.